I'm not going to read the rich man and Lazarus parable to you guys because I know all you've heard it way too many times. But I wanted to go through it a little bit and leave you with a few things that maybe you can carry away in case you encounter a good friend that's a traditionalist and throws this up at you, because it seems like rich man and Lazarus seems to be about 90% of the time when I deal with a friend that's in a Baptist or Methodist church or whatever. What about the rich man and Lazarus? And they always point out that that's a proof of hell. And so there's a lot of points to be looked at and understood about that parable. And we're not going to go through hardly any of them. I'm going to hit a few. But hopefully there's three major ones you'll remember quite easily when we get finished. By the way, there's a card in your little packet here I put together for you. Who's here has seen the hellverses.com website? Okay. What the hellverses.com website is it's we took 13 of the most prominent verses that are used by Catholics, Baptists, evangelical organizations to promote hell and to support the belief in hell. And we have about, I think we had 35 pastors, seminarians, authors, and layperson that worked on this project several years ago. And what we did was we went to the websites of all these different organizations and picked out these 13 verses, the top ones that are used all the time. And Luke 16:19 is one of those. But the way that we approached it is that we had each of the 35 people helping to work on this project send in everything that they could tell us about what they had researched and found about each one of these different verses. And we took one verse a month, and all of us worked on it together. And then we came up with bullet points. So when you look at the website, and then this is the one on Luke 16. So it will have points to consider. So it's all done in bullet points rather than paragraphs and so forth. So this particular one, what we tell people is read these bullet points before you determine what you think that particular verse is about. And then if you read these bullet points, you'll get a lot of insight from a lot of direction, and a lot of history, and a lot of context. And so this particular one has 67 points to consider before you determine what you think it means. And we're definitely not going to go through those, but I wanted to, like I said, just show you a few of them. Most of the so-called hell verses have around 20 to 30 bullet points that you might want to consider before you nail it. And I've had lots of people have told me, that verse always bothered me. That verse always bothered me. And they read these bullet points and they go, it doesn't even mean anything like what I thought it did. And so context is a big, big part of it. But just understanding the history and the audience of a lot of these verses makes a big difference too. By the way, on this particular, Clyde and I had looked at these cartoons by a guy named David. What was David's last name? Hayward, yeah. And he puts together a lot of really, really insightful cartoons, but some of them are a little bit off color. But this particular one on the rich man Lazarus, I just now noticed I'd forgotten that we put this one on here. It says there's three wise men on their camels, and they're going, I'm having second thoughts about finding this kid. I've seen into the future, and when he grows up, he sends us to hell for dabbling in astrology. Of course, but, and then I heard somebody mention the shack yesterday, and how the shack had that was Ed, wasn't it? When you tell me about the shack and how it had been a help in y'all's in a situation with your wife and so forth. But Sophia said to Mac, by the way, who else seen the shack? Oh, wow. Not very many. Okay. Then Sophia said to Mac, choose 2 of your children to spend eternity in God's new heaven and new earth, but only 2, and 3 of your children to spend eternity in hell. Can you imagine making a decision like that? So, and that's part of what the shack brings out. But as I started looking at the rich man and Lazarus again, and I got E.W. Bullinger's book out, which I had glanced through a while back, but I decided to read through it again. This is a powerful, powerful book. And even if you only read the first 10 pages of it, it completely kills this parable as a hell teaching. So I do recommend this book. It's very, very good. It's well written. The main point that he really stands on to kill this parable as a hell teaching is that the death is real. When we die, we die, and we await the resurrection, and that's it. There's no afterlife teaching in Scripture. In fact, I Googled the other day scriptures that teach that when we die, we know nothing. And Google brought up over 100 verses. And so there's a lot. It's very, very clear. Even Google can find them. So, but one thing too about this particular passage of Scripture is that there's been more controversy and more controversial writings about this passage than any other part of the Bible. It's amazing how many books have been written about it, and it seems like nobody seems to be able to really fully understand it or nail it down. But I hope you'll excuse me, but when we look through these sheets, I'm going to kind of do a lot of reading. I don't like to read in front of a group of people, but I think that's the quickest and easiest way to do this. But as I was researching some of this, I started reading parables that were common in Judea in Jesus' day. And there were Greek parables, there were Roman parables, there was Jewish parables, tons of them. And the ones that involved a rich man and a poor man and death, there were dozens of them. And so Jesus' parable here isn't a unique story at all. In fact, I put 2 of them up here on this front page, this first page. There were other first century similar parables. There once was a man named Osiris who returned from the realm of the dead in order to deal with the magicians who were upstaging the great Egyptian sorcerers. Osiris returned to this world as a baby born to a childless couple. Sounds familiar? As he was growing up and his earthly father observed the funerals of a rich man and a pauper, Osiris' father commented that he hoped he would have the life and eventual funeral like the rich man. Osiris takes that opportunity to take his father on a tour of the realm of the dead. There he learns that the pauper has been elevated to a high position and the rich man is left outside looking in. And that story, there's many versions of that story. And then another one that was pretty prominent among the Jewish people of Jesus' day was, there once was a rich tax collector named Barmajan, and a poor Torah scholar. They died on the same day, and the rich man was buried in style with many mourners, while the poor scholar was left unmourned. A friend of the poor scholar was saddened to see this great contrast, but it is subsequently revealed to him in a dream that the rich man is in torment while his poor pious friend is in a place of bliss and happiness. So we don't know that Jesus used these stories, but he knew that the people were aware of these as he took it and used it to contrast. On the second page, there are several twists to Jesus' parable, and one of them in particular is that the information about life after death, and that idea, Jesus didn't let them go and tell. He didn't want the rich man to go and tell his brothers. He was pointing out to the Jews that you've already got this information. You don't need more. And then of course Jesus, what's interesting is that the rich man refers to Abraham as Father Abraham 2 times, and Jesus didn't consider these people as children of Abraham, and they had no right calling him Father Abraham. And he even calls them vipers and snakes. When Jesus' baptism took place, he called the Pharisees and the Sadducees, vipers and snakes, and so because they were referring to themselves as Abraham's children. But let's see here, in the Egyptian and Jewish parables, the afterlife reversal is able to be conveyed back to the living. In Jesus' parable, we see the rich man was aware of the needs of the poor man, yet did nothing. The issue was not wealth, it was the attitude about others in need. This speaks directly to the Sadducees and Pharisees, who were much better off financially than most Jewish people, and their attitude toward the poor was full of arrogance. And yeah, they were extremely arrogant. To understand that many cultures today, people believe that if you're poor, you deserve to be poor because you've done something in your past or you haven't done the proper things. If you're blind, it's because of something you did or something your parents or grandparents did. It's almost the caste system, but it was pretty common for Pharisees and Sadducees to look down on people because they felt like they deserved it. And therefore, if they deserved it, why should I waste my time helping them? And that was extremely common among those people. And then, have any of y'all seen what's that series, The Chosen? Any of you been watching The Chosen? If you watch The Chosen, the writers have done a great job of showing that. You can see it very, very well. And but as we dig a little bit deeper into this passage too, we can sense that Jesus is warning these guys about the same thing that he warns them about what they're about to experience in their generation. And he makes it very clear, you are going to see this in your generation, which was the burning and the gnashing of teeth and the worm that doesn't die. And in Isaiah 66:24, they will go out and look at the dead bodies of those who rebelled against me. The worms that eat them will not die. The fire that burns them will not be quenched, and they will be loathsome to all mankind. And so the chasm that Jesus refers to between the rich man and the poor man, we see it sort of as a cold attitude that, well, it's tough luck, you're out, But he's speaking directly to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And it's very, 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 very important to understand this parable, first of all, isn't for us. This parable is for those people at that time, at that day, and for that particular situation. And so the chasm that he's referring to was what they were about to experience. And in 60, I don't know how many here have studied Jerusalem from 67 to 70 AD, but it was a mess. 1.3, 1.4 million Jews and Christians were slaughtered in horrible, horrible, horrible ways between those years. and it culminated in 70 AD. The bodies of those people were thrown into Gehenna, which Jesus warned of, which was the landfill on the west side of Jerusalem. Their bodies were left out in the open. And I don't know if you know it or not, but Jewish culture, the idea of a body not being buried within 24 hours is bad enough. But a body left out in the open is the worst of the worst of the worst. We hear of Arabs being, Muslims being repelled by the idea of being around a pig, much less a dead body of a Muslim near a pig is the worst of the worst. Well, the Jews held that same idea about just an open sky with a dead body. And so the idea of their bodies being thrown into Gehenna was bad, really bad. And that is what happened. And interestingly, and this is a little bit off subject, but I want to point out that in 70 AD, after these bodies had been burned and decayed, there was a flood that went through Jerusalem. And that flood, the heavy rain and flood, washed the bones and ash from Gehenna into a stream that was 14 miles long. And does anybody know where that stream ended? The Lake of Fire, which is the Dead Sea. The people in that region have referred to the Dead Sea as a lake of fire for centuries and centuries. In fact, it was referred to the lake of fire way back in Abraham's day, because there were spontaneous fires that would occur on the surface of the water as well as the land around the lake. They had what's called muck fires that form underground, and then it creates smoke that comes up through the soil. And these happen in southern Florida to this day. There's a common area near Sebring and south of Sebring for about 100 miles. There's a large area that has muck fires that happen regularly. Well, they had these in the Dead Sea area, so it became referred to as the Lake of Fire. And so when John mentions the Lake of Fire in the book of Revelation, this is my interpretation and Robin Perry's interpretation and a few other guys, that when those ash and bones were washed 14 miles down that stream into the Lake of Fire, that was the fulfillment of that part of the book of Revelation. But the attitude of these Jews was very, very, very harsh, and they just looked at themselves as being elevated above the poor, and that was part of what Jesus was expressing in this parable also. On this page here on 10 observations to remember, of course, context. That's our number one rule when we're studying Scripture. And I pointed out here about the arrogant attitude of the Pharisees, and the fact that we are not the audience. We're not the target audience in this passage. This is also a twist on a common style of parable in culture of Judea. Jesus has taken a common rich man, poor man scenario that uses a conscious post-death backdrop in order to make his point to this today and similar to today, we have our Peter at the pearly gates jokes. We all have heard many of those. In fact, I did hear a good one the other day that this Catholic guy died, and he was at the pearly gates with Peter, and Peter looks through the rolls and he says, "Oh, okay, you're in." He says, "Go down this hallway to door number 31, but as you're going down the hallway and going past door number 12, be real quiet." And he says to Peter, he says, "Why?" He says, "Well, that's where the Jehovah's Witnesses are, and they think they're the only ones here." So, But so we have our version of rich man, poor man jokes or stories. And then number 3, this is not a lesson in what happens after we die. Scripture is very clear with at least 100 passages declaring the dead know nothing. Then we can look through those. But and then I think it's interesting that witnesses to Jesus' telling of this parable saw firsthand just a few days later. This was just a few days before the resurrection. What we all will experience, which is the resurrection. So these people saw exactly what, remember the rich man said, yeah, but if I go back, they'll listen to a dead man that's risen from the dead. And then here Jesus comes back a few days later, and they still didn't believe. And number 4, if this was a theological lesson in post-mortem destiny and who goes where after they die, then it's clear teaching that being poor is definitely the way to go. So, when I was in a Baptist church growing up, and this one came up, I always told my friends, I said, I think I'd be better off just to be a poor beggar. Number 5, this is perhaps the most controversial passage in the Bible with hundreds of books written about it. I already pointed that out. Martin Luther taught that this was simply a parable about our attitudes regarding the wealthy and the poor, certainly not a treatise on afterlife. The rich man and Lazarus is often cited as a predominant basis for the belief in hell. And this is the 5th parable within a grouping of 4 parables that Jesus delivers to his detractors. It is interesting that so many people don't read the other parables when they're using this to promote hell. The name Lazarus is synonymous with Eliezer, who was Abraham's close and loved servant, destined to be the heir of Abraham's house if he remained childless. He was a Gentile and looked down upon by most Jews. And then N.T. Wright. Anybody familiar with N.T. Wright? Oh yeah, he's probably the most respected New Testament writer in our, at least in the traditional church circles in the world today. He says the parable of the rich man and Lazarus is to be treated precisely as a parable, not as a literal description of the afterlife and its possibilities. It is therefore inappropriate to use it as prima facie evidence for Jesus' own sketching of a standard post-mortem scenario. And then last but not least, the confusion surrounding this controversial passage of Scripture has been perfectly orchestrated. Did you catch that? Clyde did a really good talk on King James Version on one of his YouTube videos that Steve posted. And it's interesting. I thought about that after listening to it. God used the King James Version to screw things up. I mean, it's perfectly within his plan. And then just as the misunderstandings brought about through the King James Version in the Bible, as well as immaculate befuddlement that occurred at the Tower of Babel. I've heard people say that God is not a God of confusion. Well, Paul's the one that said that, and he wasn't talking about God's plan and what God's doing. He was talking about a group of believers who were getting together in fellowship, and they were having tons of confusion in their fellowship. And he was just basically saying, you need to organize your meetings and have a more organized time. And so he wasn't saying that God is not a God of confusion. And of course, the most confusing event in all history was the Tower of Babel. And we know who was in charge of that. And then the very end here, Clyde and I were talking about this yesterday, and we kind of realized that this really could be worded maybe even more accurately. What is greater than resurrection? Any suggestions or ideas or thoughts?
Love.
Huh? It's a tricky question, but I'll give it to you here. And the reason I say that is that we're believers. And when we are resurrected, we're going to be pleasantly enjoying and surprised with our resurrection, with our new bodies and our new environment. But can you imagine the Adolf Hitlers and the Mussolinis and the Yoko Onos of this world that I should say I'm a big Beatles fan, and everybody that's a Beatles fan doesn't like Yoko Ono. But the people who are resurrected that certainly don't expect it. What an amazing thing to be shown mercy when you least expect it. And I think it's probably about 90 to 95% of the planet. Yeah, so if not more. So, but well, I just wanted to point out a few of these things, but I would say that your takeaway, the three main things to remember is that death is death. So the teaching of the parable with some sort of post-life idea is obviously fictitious. Number two is context. And what was number three? I've forgotten. Here I am trying to show you. Oh yeah, it's just that this is it's a story that's been expanded upon other stories that were common in their day. So, but I think the most important, which Bollinger points out, is that when we die, we die. Unfortunately, that's just a short breath away and a short moment away. I saw a really interesting testimony of a woman who was in a coma for about 6 years. And when she came out of the coma, she'd gone in on a Monday and she thought it was Tuesday, So, I think that's going to be the same way for us when we're resurrected. The time sense is going to be nothing. So whether it's 300 years from now or 3,000 years from now, whenever it is, it's going to be instantaneous in our minds.